Let me look at the other side of it now, the ways in which one can question the concept of family in Britain. And it strikes me there were several main sort of, as it were, exclusions, but one really wasn't a member of the family if one was living in Britain. If, for example, one was black, there's no doubt that there existed, well, at the least, considerable mistrust of immigrants who were coming to the country in some numbers by the mid to late 50s. The Daily Sketch, a right-wing tabloid that in many ways anticipates the modern day Sun, had a poll of its readers in 1955 in which they put to the readers the point that too many of these West Indian immigrants would be doomed to poverty relieved only by the public purse. And it found that 97.6% were against unrestricted entry, 81.3% were in favour of stopping entry altogether, so 81.3% in favour of stopping entry altogether. And there was that time-honoured English vice of hypocrisy. And just to quote one West Indian writer, writing in 1954, who experienced firsthand this hypocrisy, as he tried to find somewhere to live in London. This is what he wrote. What is wrong is with what they style the neighbour. Since I came here, I never met a single English person who had any colour prejudice. Once, I walked the whole length of the street looking for a room, and everyone told me that he or she had no prejudice against coloured people. It was the neighbour that was stupid. If we could only find the neighbour, we could solve the entire problem. And the second exclusion, perhaps inevitably, is if one was gay, if one was homosexual in the 50s. It was no fun at all. I suppose, well, one can mention various people. The most celebrated, most infamous episode was one of the most distinguished scientists in Britain in the 20th century, Alan Turing, who was really handed to his death, to suicide, in these years. And a most appalling story. A less dramatic story concerned a very distinguished actor, John Gielgud. He, in 1953, was fined £10 for, quote, persistent importuning in Chelsea. And this, of course, sorry to remind you, if you don't know, was at a time when even consensual homosexual acts in private were still illegal. And when Gielgud was fined, one right-wing paper, the Sunday Express, which still exists, had a much bigger circulation than it does now, and was pretty, well, certainly very widely read in its way influential paper. And their weekly columnist, a man called John Gordon, he wrote, "There must be sharp and severe punishment, but more important than that, we must get the social conscience of the nation so roused that such people are made social lepers." And the founder of the Samaritans, which began in this period, Chad Barrow, who I think, died quite recently, a couple of years ago, he was a clergyman who began the Samaritans, which is, as a service to the people who are contemplating suicide, and so on. And he wrote in his autobiography, "In the early days, a frequent cause of a suicidal intent or attempt was that a male homosexual had been discovered to be such by some ill-disposed person who was black and I think we could broaden it and actually say that in this period, anyone who in a way was different was in some sense excluded or was difficult to kind of integrate in society. And I draw your attention to, I think, the supreme comedian of the period, Tony Hancock. His whole persona in his radio and television shows was a man feeling shackled by society's conventions, but unable to escape or transcend them, a permanent outsider. There's a certain line to be drawn, I think. I wouldn't want to push it too much between the Hancock persona in the 50s. There's just similarities, I think, with Ricky Gervais as David Brent in the office. There's something, it's that sort of pent-up thing towards society, which I think is such age to the common. Class, social class was ubiquitous in this period. It ran through, I mean, like the sort of stick of seaside rock, it kind of just ran through everything. One example, it's a bit corny, but it's quite nice. In cricket, it was still a two-class system, gentlemen and players. They changed separately, and they came out of different dress rooms and different prestige and so on. And if you were a gentleman, you had your initials in front of your surname on the scorecard. If you were a player, i.e. a professional, you had your initials after your surname on the scorecard. And there was a day in 1950 when a young Middlesex professional came out to bat at Lords against Surrey, and the announcement solemnly came over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, a correction to your scorecards. For F.J. Titmus, please read Titmus, F.J. And no one, I think, has depicted more brilliantly the Acadies class in this period than Alan Bennett, the son of a co-op butcher in Leeds, who went up to Oxford in the autumn of 1954. And he arrived at his college lodge, and an awful truth hit him. It was piled high with trunks pasted with ancient labels, trunks that had holidayed in grand hotels, travelled first class on liners, trunks painted with 4 and even 5 initials. They were trunks of fathers that were never trunks of sons, trunks of generations. I had 2 Schoenfort antler suitcases that I had gone with my mother to buy at Schofield's in Leeds, an agonising process, since it had involved her explaining to the shop assistant, a class my mother always assumed the persons of some refinement, that the cases were for going to Oxford with on a scholarship. And were these the kind of thing? They weren't. 1 foot across the threshold of that college lodge, and I saw it, and hurried to hide them beneath my cold bed. Well, I'll wind up now. In terms of this question, family written or not in the 1950s, in that Orwell sense, it's obviously a very complicated picture. Overall, there's clearly something in Orwell's analogy. It was a more cohesive society in the 50s than it is now, but also, of course, a more liberal, authoritarian one. I want to stress that it's a complicated picture. In my book, I try to steer some kind of course between that Thatcher view and that Hare view that I related at the start. There was a very brilliant historian a generation or so back called J.H. Hexter, who once divided historians into lumpers or splitters. One was either a lumper, so one gathered together bits of evidence and made, found generalizations and conclusions from that evidence, or one was a splitter, in which everything was susceptible to qualification, and one was very low to make rash generalizations and so on. I think as one gets older, one does inevitably become more of a splitter, and that's partly because, of course, one knows more, one learns more, in some sense anyway, incrementally, and I guess temporarily one's no longer hot for certainties in the way that one was when younger. But as a final remark, I would say that while you're young, if you're a historian, don't be afraid to lump, leave it splitting to it.